All right, we have been continuing a series we've been doing on these meals with Jesus, I mentioned already, going through the Gospel of Luke and realizing that this theme of hospitality, this theme of who accepts Jesus and who rejects Jesus, and who does Jesus accept and stand with and eat with, and so how important that was during that day and age, that Jesus was one who came eating and drinking. As I said, he was a friend of sinners and tax collectors. He was accused of standing with all the wrong people, and all that meant. But Jesus, the friend of sinners, that he eats with sinners. That was the accusation. Robert Karras says that in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. And in Luke's Gospel, Jesus got himself killed because of the way he ate. This is where a lot of tension came up, where those who were kind of resisting him could point to this and say, he's crossing all the wrong barriers, and so he's not safe, he's dangerous, and he's going to do a lot of damage. So, and during this series, what we've been talking about is not only how does Jesus welcome us and invite us, we come to his table each week and we come and receive from him, but also how can we extend that same invitation, not just at this table, but around our own tables at home, and maybe a meal during lunch with a coworker or something like that. How do we welcome and stand with and extend the invitation that Jesus has extended to us, to others, through this practice of hospitality? How can we eat like Jesus did? This morning we're going to be looking at Luke 10, short little passage and familiar passage, but maybe too familiar, or maybe we've gotten the wrong idea behind it. But looking at this lens, in the lens of this hospitality, may make this familiar passage a little bit different, stand out. So beginning with verse 38, just a few verses. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." So the familiar story of the two sisters, Mary and Martha, and how do we maybe recognize ourselves in one or the other, and what it might look like. This has often been used to be talking about busyness and other things versus stillness, activity versus contemplation or reflection, and it kind of gives a bad rap to those who are more service-minded rather than those who are more reflective. I think maybe it's been twisted a little way to kind of say it's not as important what you do as just being in the presence of Jesus, and it's kind of contrasting two ways and even two personality styles. And some of us may be more the active kind of style, may feel like this is kind of almost a personal attack, and I don't think that it's meant to be that. I think that it's more about priorities than it is about personality or style, and I don't think Martha is being rebuked so sternly as much as trying to be corrected, trying to be just aimed a little bit clearer. And there's a couple of different things, just technically, that this translation maybe didn't make as clear as possible. One, this idea that Martha opened her home to Jesus. So here we have Martha is the one who's the host in this scene. This is another scene where Jesus is receiving, not only kind of staying in the home, but also obviously being fed and given a meal, and all of this would have gone with the hospitality in that day and age. Weren't hotels, weren't other things, so he's on his way, he's dependent on people who would extend that kind of hospitality to him. Even as he sent the disciples out in the same way, he said, birds and foxes have dens and birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He's one who was dependent on. He came vulnerably, and he came in need of being received. So Martha is the one to do it. Now it's interesting that it's Martha, because we know that Martha and Mary have a brother named Lazarus. And in this day and in this culture, you would think Lazarus would have been the one that would have been named. Lazarus would be the one who extended the welcome. It would have been Lazarus' home. But it's Martha. Martha is the one who's doing this. And Lazarus doesn't even come in this little passage here. We know the relation from other texts, but it's Martha who welcomes. She's the one. And we also know from a couple of chapters earlier in Luke 8 that there are a number of women who responded to Jesus, that were kind of patrons of Jesus, that supported his ministry, that showed hospitality. And that passage, Luke 8, 1-3, we have a sense in which it's a summary passage about his ministry. And so, especially at this time day in literature, this idea is that this is setting the pattern, and so this pattern is to be assumed the rest of the way. So in Luke 8, 1-3, it says this: After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. So again, it's a summary passage. The idea is that this is the norm, and unless it's like specifically stated, that's assumed. And so I think what has often been lost is in a lot of these situations, including the Last Supper, Robert Karras would argue, the women disciples were present, most likely. It doesn't, especially Luke doesn't say this is just the 12. He gathered with his disciples. And so we have maybe kind of written women out of the picture. And Luke is saying, no, these women were there also. They were key members they were supporting. And here we have one, Mary, who's sitting at his feet, who's learning, who's assuming right along with the other disciples, who's paying attention to him, sitting and being taught. And so I think sometimes we've kind of made a distinction there where the 12 or the male disciples are the ones who were being taught and carrying on that, and the women were maybe in the background paying the bills and cooking. But here, there's clearly a distinction between that, and Jesus breaks down that barrier. So that's the first thing that's really central to this passage, is that, and it's very also typical of Luke, that he often pairs men and women. And we looked at the parables, the lost parables, a little while. And typical of Luke, you have the shepherd who goes out for the sheep, and then immediately paired with it, the woman who lost her coin. And then the parable of the father and the son, something like that. But there's a man, there's a woman. And Luke at least seems to be open and broadening this idea that Jesus' concern certainly wasn't just limited to the 12 or to men. So here we have these women. How does Jesus respond to these women? One thing about this translation that I just read that's a little bit off is that in verse 40, as Martha is complaining to Jesus about her sister, there's a word that's used twice, and it's translated 2 different ways in this passage. It says, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made, and then later, when she's talking to Jesus, she says, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Now the word preparations and the word work there, both are the same word. In the ESV, it's translated as serve. She's concerned by all the things that she's doing to serve, and the preparations to serve, and he wants Mary to help serve as well. Now the word for serve is actually diakonai, which is where we get the word deacon. And we know from Romans 16 and other places that there were women who were named as deacons by Paul. So this is certainly, again, not just table waitress. This is not just, though it has that kind of go-between kind of thing, but the idea of being a deacon and being one who serves was certainly not limited just to men or whatever. And so this idea that Martha is using this word, and that was also used in that passage in chapter 8 that I mentioned, that they served him, that there's at least some scholars believe that this is pointing towards the women were helping to support them out of their own means. They were serving. They were serving, and some say instead of kind of viewing that as a background kind of role, it should instead be saying they were serving alongside or serving along with the other disciples. But there's this word deacon, diakonai, and the broader context of Jesus' ministry about the men and the women that were both involved in his ministry here. So that's just kind of a couple background things, but as we look at how he responded to each of these women in particular and why he attends to their needs and responds to them in the same way he responded to children and outcasts and other people. This, again, these are the marginalized. These are the people that society doesn't include. And Jesus' inclusion of them is radical. And I think sometimes we don't see that, or sometimes we see, and we put Jesus back into the culture of his day as if he fit well there. And I don't think Jesus fit well there. He doesn't fit well here either. I don't think Jesus comes into any culture and fits. He comes into each culture and he turns everything on its head. And so when we read Jesus as a typical patriarchal first century Jewish male, I think we're boxing Jesus in a way that certainly his contemporaries didn't respond to him in that way. There's something different about this guy, and he kept breaking out of those barriers. So that's part of what's kind of behind this passage in general. But why don't you put the next slide up there? I want to show this image. I like this image. It's very simple. It's not meant to be kind of representative. But you have Jesus at the center there, and you have the two sisters, one on either side. And this really kind of visually portrays this passage really well. Because you see Martha's there on this side with the jug in her hands. And just look at her body posture. What do you notice about the way she is positioned in this image?
She's focusing on the other way.
She's looking at Mary. She's kind of glancing over her shoulder and maybe a little frustrated, or but her attention is on Mary, who's not helping her out. What else?
She's turned away from Jesus.
Yeah, her back's to Jesus. She's focused. She's looking at Mary, and she's got her back to Jesus, and she's busy with something else. Something else has caused her to turn away from Jesus and focus on something else. And then it's also brought this kind of division between her and her sister. What about Mary in the picture? Yeah? What do you see?
Back to the left, and then she's looking at Jesus.
Well, she's oriented towards Jesus, and even also toward her sister. But she's open, she's oriented, and she's got her hands in her lap. She's still, she's not at work, she's still, and her focus is in on Jesus. Actually, you can see her head is kind of down. It almost looks like she's looking directly at his feet. This idea that she was sitting at his feet. That's kind of visually represented. She's sitting below him and focused on him in a humble way, but her attention is towards him. And what about Jesus in this picture? Where do you see him?
He's open to both of them.
Yeah, he's open to both of them. And I think that's really interesting. He's open to both of them, but he's blessing. He's got his hand out in blessing towards Mary, the one who's there to receive it. But he's not turned away from Martha, but he is extending his blessing to the one who would receive it in Mary. So I think that shows this dynamic that's going on here. And again, Luke often has this triangle. There's a couple people, and there's a presenting situation, and Martha's trying to point out that Mary's in the wrong. You get Jesus to address her, but again, Jesus brings her out. Oftentimes it's a Pharisee, like noticing that he's talking to the woman who's washing his feet. Oh, if he was a prophet, he wouldn't let her touch him and all that kind of stuff. And instead, Jesus says, let me ask you a question. And he draws him out and brings him into the context. The real concern is this one over here. At least that's the one that's still in question. This woman, in her response, has already received Jesus in a way. And so now he turns to the Pharisee who hasn't. In the same way, his response here is not to rebuke Mary. He doesn't really address Mary at all. He talks about what she's done, but it's an invitation to Martha. Martha wants him to fix Mary, but instead he brings her in. He invites her to turn and respond. Similar to the older brother again in the parable of the prodigal son. This is invitation. This is what's happened with your younger sibling, and I want to invite you to respond in the same way. Invite you in as well. So Jesus' stance of invitation, rather than just kind of cold rebuke here, is one that needs to be noticed. But what is it that Jesus is condemning? How does he approach Martha? What is it that he is bothered by? And again, it starts just by Martha, Martha. It starts with compassion. It starts with a focus on her. He longs to receive her as well. It's similar to Moses. God calling from the burning bush, Moses, Moses, and he responds, here I am. And this is the introduction into which God's saving work now gets extended into the world. Martha, Martha, it's the invitation to recognize and be present with me here. Martha. But what he addresses to her is that Martha's concern has to do more than is necessary in the hosting. Now, Chester says this: Martha is attending to herself as hostess rather than attending to Jesus, her guest. So some of us have to learn that our guests matter more than our hospitality. Our aim is to serve, not to impress. And Brendan Byrne says, Martha has gone overboard in the duties of hospitality. She is busy about preparing many dishes when really only one is needed. And so he's saying that in this there's convoluted textual history in there in Jesus' response in verse 41. You're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Some manuscripts just say, but only one thing is needed. And he's arguing that really what he's saying there is, you're trying to create course after course after course for me, and I just need a simple meal. That's all I needed. Now that the meal has been prepared and we've enjoyed the meal, join me at the meal. That's enough. You're focusing more on trying to impress and trying to throw this lavish feast, and even if that may be a good intention, even if that may be a good thing to try to lavish this kind of attention or this love and serve Jesus, you're missing out by focusing on what you're doing for me rather than just on focusing on me. So he says you're being anxious to the point of missing out. Robert Karras says the emphasis of the passage is not on the contrast between contemplation and action, like one of these is better than the other, but on being anxious to the degree of missing the boat. And anxiety is a big concern for Jesus. And he has teachings about that. We'll talk about that in a minute when we look at Mary and think about our own situation. What does it mean for us? What anxieties are crowding out our fruitfulness? Think about the parable of the sower, where it's the weeds and the thistles that come up and choke out the good seed so that it becomes fruitless. Jesus is concerned that we don't be distracted. We don't allow these things to keep us from the fullness of what God has for us. And so he's concerned about her drawing attention to herself, about her missing out herself, and about her desire to kind of pull Mary into missing out too. This is something that he addresses the Pharisees at the time. And not only are you refusing to, but you pile on the laws on people and they don't even lift a finger to help. Or he says at one point, you travel over miles and miles, over hill over dale, to make one convert, only to make them twice the son of hell as you are. These are the passages we don't hear preached on very often. Jesus isn't always very meek and mild and kind, but he's very concerned about not only are you missing out yourself because you are not responding to the invitation, but you're making it hard for other people to respond to me. You're denying other people access. You're making them miss out as well. And so not only is he concerned for Martha, but he doesn't want Mary to lose what she has chosen. So he's concerned about Martha for those things. She's drawing attention to herself. She's missing out on what Jesus really wants to offer her. And she's endangering Mary's ability to receive from Jesus. These are all concerns that Jesus has. But what is it that he's affirming? As we think about Mary, as we think about that, he affirms Mary's deeper welcome. Martha is the one who welcomed him, opened her home to him, but Mary is the one who received him. Mary's the one who received him and gave attention to him and to his words. Because Jesus wants her undivided and undistracted attention. The ESV, again, rather than she's chosen the better thing, the ESV talks about she has chosen the good portion. You think about the meal. She's chosen the choice morsel. She's chosen what's best. And it won't be taken away from her. Robert Karras says, both sisters are good. They both are trying to welcome Jesus. And as in his other occasions at table, Jesus does not condemn, he corrects. Because when Jesus is the guest, all eyes must be on him. He is the one thing necessary. He is the good portion. So, the guest who opens up that deeper hospitality to those who welcome him. That's what he's affirming, to be received. And again, we come back to John as he talks about Jesus' incarnation, saying he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. But those who did receive him, he gave the right to become children of God. And again, there's this concern about will you receive Jesus? And if you do, you find that you have been received. You've been accepted. You didn't have to earn it. You don't impress him into it, and then now he shows favor on you. You don't, wow Jesus with your obedience, and then he goes, oh wow, I like this guy. No. He accepts us, and we find ourselves that we have been accepted. When we receive Jesus and we find that we've been invited in, we've already been accepted into the deeper hospitality of God. And so Jesus is affirming in Mary this deeper receiving, this deeper hospitality. Byrne says, Mary has chosen, she's not passive, her action is a result of a free choice. She's chosen to offer a deeper responsibility. She's recognized who this visitor is and received him with the hospitality of loving attention and listening that is truly appropriate. The way she has chosen will not be taken away from her. The implication is that Martha should be content with preparing the one dish that ordinary hospitality requires and join Mary in her deeper hospitality. In this way, she will experience what her sister is experiencing. Their visitors welcome into the hospitality of God. So I think what comes out of here, again, is this idea of us missing out. There's a particular danger of serving Jesus but failing to be attentive in our relationship to Jesus through the Word and through prayer, in which the Spirit reminds us and invites us and unites us with Christ. Are we serving and not being attentive? Are we allowing ourselves to be distracted by anxieties, worries, even over legitimate concerns or good things? Martha's not an enemy of Jesus, not an enemy of the Word. She's not but she's just distracted. Again, Byrne says, frenetic service, even service of the Lord, can be a deceptive distraction from what the Lord really wants. Luke has already warned that the grasp of the Word can be choked by the cares and worries of life. This is, again, the weeds from the parable of the sower. And here the cares and worries seem well justified. Are they not in the service of the Lord? But precisely therein lies the power of the temptation, the great deceit. True hospitality, even that given directly to the Lord, attends to what the guest really wants. I read recently in a book by Wayne Cordero, I believe it was, Sifted. He talked, or actually I heard him speaking live when he said this, and he was saying that sometimes a ministry's success can actually get us further away from God, because if our goals are not the goals God wants us to, then even if we reach them, we're going in the wrong direction. So sometimes we focus more on our goals, our ministry, or being a good person, or doing the things that we think we're supposed to be doing, and if we got it wrong, if we're not being attentive to what God's really inviting us to do, then every step towards our goals is a step in the wrong direction. We're missing out. We throw a lavish feast, and Jesus is saying, but you were in the kitchen the whole time. I wanted to talk to you. You needed to hear what I have to say. And this has certainly been my experience. My relationship with God is way too tied up with what I have to offer. And so when I don't feel like I have anything to offer, I feel like God's disappointed in me. And my relationship suffers. When I had resigned a position in Kalamazoo and I hadn't come out here yet and I wasn't doing anything, I really wrestled with God. I couldn't pray, I couldn't read because I felt like I wasn't doing anything for God, and so He had to be disappointed in me. And the reality that God would be proud of me, even when I had nothing to base that on, nothing that I could. It's not a response to something I did. It's not earned. It's that He delights in me. This is something that I've again and again, it has to bring me back to a place where I wrestle with it. And so when I look around and things don't go the way I want them to, and when the church doesn't grow as fast as I want it to, and I think it must be something about me, God's disappointed in me or mad at me, and maybe it's just that I just haven't been listening. Because those who come close to Jesus never hear Him condemn. They hear Him say, Kevin, you're anxious about a lot of things. But there's one thing. It's just one thing. Just don't miss it. So for us, in our hospitality, do we focus on the other and offer the deep hospitality that Mary's offer, the true presence to people? to listen, to be attentive to their needs, to give them what they want rather than try to impress them? Are we more focused on ourselves, our work, our sacrifice, our service? And then when this translates to our relationship with God, are we attentive to Jesus? Are we hanging on his every word, sitting at his feet? Are we making space? Or are we distracted? Are the concerns of this world choking out our fruitfulness? Whether that be concerns about our finances, concerns about our family, concerns about other things that we don't really have any control over, or even concerns about ministry and success and serving God and being the person God wants us to be. When we get so down on ourselves, we're feeling like we're not good enough, we're not the Christian that we want to be, that God must be mad at us, and then we miss God calling our name and inviting us to be still, to receive from him the one thing, the good portion. As we serve Jesus, are we open to those unexpected moments when the Master invites us to recline at the table and serves us himself? Not because we've earned reward, but because he desires to serve us. And in Luke 12, we have that strange story where he's talking about being ready, being prepared, and the servants who are waiting on their master. And if the master comes after being away for a while and finds that they're ready, he's delighted and he tells them to recline at table, and he serves them himself. Jesus wants to serve us. Not because we've earned it, but because he desires to serve. He is glorified when we receive the good thing that he wants to give us. He doesn't want to be distant. He doesn't want slaves. He wants friends. He wants children. And so even as we do serve him, there are these unexpected moments when he says, come away, you sit down, and I want to serve you. I think of that when we come to the table. Jesus desires to serve us. And we think of service as a humbling thing. And that's because our value is all messed up. The ones who have less are the ones that serve the ones who have. But Jesus shows that that's opposite. That this whole world exists because God is so full and so great that it spills over. And he desires to pour out his goodness and his love and his mercy on people. And he wants them to receive it. And he's not just trying to kind of impress us with himself so that we stand back and go, wow, he's a lot bigger and stronger than I am. He wants us to receive his love. He wants us to receive the work, his working hand in our lives that is making us more like him, that is drawing out of us the best of what is in us. He's pouring out. He's not trying to suck in. He's not trying to get from us. We offer him our lives. We offer him our tithes, our gifts back, our little things, our time. We give him a half an hour here or there. We feel like we're giving to him. We've got it all messed up. He is the one who serves us. Not because he has to, but because that's who he is. That's what love is. It's focused on the other. If God is love, then it's focused on the other, not on yourself. When you're in love with someone, you're not concerned for yourself. Your focus is totally on that other person. You're caught up in that person. Jesus looks at us, God looks at us, and he's so overwhelmingly caught up in us. He wants our best. He wants to give to us. He wants us to receive it with joy. And when we refuse that and we go, no, you know, I'm good. I don't need anything. Let me give you something. It's got to be so frustrating for him. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you want to serve me, but would you receive what I want to give? I'm going to close with a poem by George Herbert. The language is a little bit older, English language here, but if you hear this, there's this dialogue between the self and God. And some people claim that he wrote this as he was thinking particularly about the Eucharist, about the Lord's Supper, and this welcome that he had and his feeling of being unworthy. This poem is simply called Love No. 3. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack, from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I the unkind, ungrateful? Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand, and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Love bids us welcome. And though we are not worthy and we can see in ourselves all the reasons why we should pull back, love comes close and draws us in. And when I'm not worthy, I can just, well, who bore the blame? Let me remind you again. All that's necessary for you to come, I've taken care of. And then at the end there it says, well, then let me serve. Let me serve you. And love says, no, you must sit and eat. It's a subtle thing, but I think it's a pride issue. We still want to earn something. We still feel like we need to earn our place here. So when we find ourselves welcomed by God, well, let me serve at least. And God says, no, that's my role. You don't get to play my role. I will serve you. You have to sit and eat. That's the arrangement here. You haven't been invited to wait at the table. You've been invited to sit and eat and receive. So it's not necessarily that the action is wrong. It's just that we can't miss the main thing. Again, I don't think that Martha is being rebuked for wanting to serve Jesus. It's just that she's not valuing what Jesus wants to give her enough. She's still valuing what she is offering more than what Jesus is offering. And when we're at that place, we're still not ready to fully receive him. It's still about us.